My name is Esther Chambers. I am 47 years old, a writer, a historian of sorts, living a quiet life where words are my trade and my refuge. I never thought my own life would take such a dramatic turn that I would find myself speaking words that feel too ancient, too weighty for my modern hands to carry. Yet on the night of September 12, 2025, I had an experience that irrevocably altered the fabric of my reality. Doctors may categorize it with clinical detachment as a near-death experience, but I know in the deepest part of my soul that what happened to me was no medical phenomenon. It was a divine encounter, a deliberate interruption of eternity that opened my eyes to truths I am now compelled to share with the world. What makes this testimony so urgent is its precise and terrible timing. Just 2 days prior, on September 10th, 2025, the news had broken like a fever across America and then the globe. Charlie Kirk had died suddenly. He was only 31 years old, a young man who had, for better or worse, become a loud, unashamed, and unavoidable voice in America's ferocious cultural and political battles. His passing sent a shockwave through the nation. The digital world erupted in a firestorm of polarized grief and glee. Social media became a battlefield. His followers mourned him as a fallen warrior, a courageous champion of truth who was taken too soon. His critics, with equal fervor, mocked his passing or dismissed his life's work as a divisive and destructive force. The air itself felt thick with confusion, with anger, with fractured arguments and deeply personal debates. A young, prominent voice had been silenced, and in the vacuum, 1,000 other voices screamed to define his legacy. And then, as if by divine and sovereign design, just as the world was arguing over the meaning of his life, I was taken into a realm beyond human eyes. And there I was shown the truth, not the headlines, not the opinions, not the political spin. I was shown heaven's perspective on the life and death of Charlie Kirk. On the night of September 12th, a profound disquiet settled upon my soul. As a writer, I am accustomed to observing the world, to sifting through the noise of human events to find the narrative thread. But the noise surrounding Charlie Kirk's death was different. It was a deafening, chaotic roar. I sat in my study that evening, the blue light of my computer screen illuminating a storm of digital eulogies and condemnations. I saw people who had loved him raising him to the status of a martyr, and I saw those who had loathed him dancing on his virtual grave. His entire complex and controversial life was being flattened into a meme, a hashtag, a political talking point. His legacy was being written and rewritten in real time by 1,000 angry, grieving, and triumphant hands, and I was struck by the utter vanity of it all. A deep, unsettling conviction washed over me. The world was arguing over a shadow, while the substance of a soul was being weighed on a different scale entirely. I felt a weariness that went deeper than my bones. It was a soul weariness, an exhaustion from the sheer weight of the world's anger. I wasn't feeling well. My chest was heavy, as if the gravity of this historical moment, the eternal significance of a soul passing from time into eternity, was physically pressing down on me. I lay down earlier than usual, but sleep would not come. I stared at the dark ceiling, my mind a relentless scroll of headlines and cable news pundits, all offering their definitive, final judgment on a man whose true judgment was now irrevocably out of their hands. Questions I couldn't answer churned within me. In the final, divine accounting, what is the true measure of a life? Can a man who fights so fiercely in the public square, who engenders so many, still be a servant of a God of love? How does heaven view a soul that earth either sanctifies or demonizes? I felt as though the entire roaring debate of the nation was a distraction, a grand and noisy diversion from a quiet, solemn, and infinitely more important event that was happening just beyond the veil of our reality. Somewhere in the deep of the night, as I drifted in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, the pressure in my chest intensified. It was not a pain, not a medical emergency, but a profound spiritual pressing. My breathing, which had been shallow and anxious, slowed to a deep, calm rhythm. My vision at the edges of the dark room began to dim, to recede, as if I were looking through a closing aperture. Panic tried to find a foothold, but there was nowhere for it to grow. An inexplicable, supernatural calm was descending upon me, a peace that was not the absence of trouble, but the presence of a great and awesome authority. And then, in a split second that contained an eternity, the perspective shifted. My awareness detached, and I saw myself from above. My body lay still and silent on the bed, a temporary vessel at rest. But my soul, my consciousness, my truest self was rising. The world I knew began to unravel. My bedroom, the familiar shapes of furniture in the dark, the very walls of my house did not simply fade to black. Instead, they dissolved into the light that was pulling me, their solid forms breaking apart into shimmering particles and being absorbed into a new and overwhelming reality. I was being pulled through what I can only describe as a tunnel of radiant, living light. This was not the empty brightness of a sterile hospital corridor. This was a substance, a vortex of pure energy that was both the path and the vehicle. The light was alive, pulsing with a gentle, rhythmic warmth, as if I were traveling through the very heart of love itself. The deeper I went, the more the weight of my mortal life was stripped away from me, a lifetime of burdens falling away like broken chains. I felt the gnawing, low-level anxiety I carried about my future, about finances, about the state of the world. It was not just forgotten. It was dissolved, exposed as a meaningless shadow in this place of perfect provision. I felt the old, lingering grief from my mother's passing years ago, a wound I thought had scarred over, be gently lifted from my soul and completely healed, replaced by a joyful certainty of her well-being. The physical aches and pains of a 47-year-old body, the stiffness in my back, the faint, persistent headache I had gone to bed with, they vanished, leaving me feeling ageless, weightless, and perfectly whole. I was being unburdened, purified, and prepared. It was in the heart of this transformative passage that I heard a voice. It was not a sound that traveled to an ear, but a thought that resonated through my entire being, a voice of pure authority that was simultaneously as powerful as thunder and as gentle as a father's whisper. "You are being shown this for a reason," the voice declared, its words not spoken but known, imprinted directly onto my consciousness. "You will return to the world you knew, but what you see here you must declare." A tremor went through my soul, a vibration not of fear but of sheer, unadulterated awe. In that instant, any lingering notion that this was a dream, a hallucination, or a phenomenon of a dying brain was obliterated. I understood with a terrifying and wonderful clarity that this was real, more real than the life I had just left. I was a mortal historian being given a divine briefing, a reluctant soul being drafted into a cosmic purpose. The weight of that commission, the burden of those words, "you must declare," was heavier than any earthly care that had just been lifted from me. My journey had a purpose. I was not a tourist in eternity, I was a messenger. As the voice's commission settled into my being, the tunnel of light opened, and I emerged into a realm so glorious that my soul instinctively fell to its knees in adoration. I was standing on what I can only describe as the outskirts of heaven. The very air was different here. It was not a gas, but a living substance, thick with a fragrance of unknown celestial flowers and a song that was woven into the very fabric of reality. A holy presence, a palpable atmosphere of pure, untainted goodness filled everything. It was a presence so profound that it was almost a weight, pressing all pride and self-importance out of me, leaving only a state of humble, reverent awe. I was on sacred ground, an intruder of dust and time in a land of eternal light. Around me stood beings of light, angels. But they were nothing like the fragile cherubic figures from Renaissance paintings. These were towering, radiant warriors, their forms forged from brilliant light, hinting at shimmering armor and swords that could cut through the fabric of darkness. Their faces were both terrifying and beautiful, ancient with a wisdom that predated stars, and powerful with an authority that could command galaxies. Their eyes, like liquid fire, pierced into the deepest parts of my soul. It was not a gaze of condemnation, but one of perfect, unclouded perception. It was the feeling of being X-rayed by truth itself, a gaze that saw every flaw, every fear, and every ounce of faith within me, and knew it all completely. I felt utterly transparent, and yet strangely at peace. One of the angelic warriors stepped forward. The light he emanated was brighter, and his presence carried a perfect equilibrium of serene peace and absolute power. As he approached, the very air around him seemed to hum with his authority. He stood before me, a giant of gentle strength, and he spoke, his voice not a sound but a perfect, resonant thought in my mind. "You have been summoned to this threshold, Esther Chambers," he declared, his use of my full name a formal and sobering acknowledgement. "A pillar has fallen in the mortal realm, and its collapse has sent tremors of confusion and division across your world. The earth is consumed with debating the legacy of a life now concluded. They argue with the fragments of a story, but you will be shown the completed chapter as it is written here. A voice has been silenced on earth, but his story is not finished, for the echoes of a faithful life continue into eternity. You must be a witness of what you see, so that those with ears to hear may understand the divine accounting." As his final word resonated within me, he raised a hand. The air before me shimmered, and a scroll, glowing with radiant, golden letters, materialized from the light, and on it was written a name that made my spiritual heart pound: Charlie Kirk. The name glowed before me, woven from threads of pure, golden light: Charlie Kirk. My spiritual heart, an entity I could now feel as the very core of my being, pounded with a mixture of terror and profound awe. This was no longer an abstract, national tragedy I was pondering from the comfort of my home. This was a divine summons, a direct and personal assignment that was being laid upon me in the very courts of heaven. The glowing scroll hovered in the air, a document of ultimate and final authority. As a writer, I had spent my life with books and records, with the flawed, biased, and incomplete histories of men. I understood the power of a written account, but this was different. This was not a story written by human hands. This was a life's complete and final manuscript, penned by the author of existence itself. The scroll represented a story that was now finished, a book that had been closed, its contents sealed for eternity. The furious debates I had witnessed on earth suddenly seemed so trivial, so foolish. They were arguments over a rough draft, while the final, published work resided here. I had, of course, followed his life from a distance, as had most of America. My feelings had always been a complex mixture of admiration and apprehension. I had seen clips of his speeches on college campuses, watched as he stood his ground amidst a sea of screaming protesters, and I had felt a genuine respect for his sheer, unyielding boldness. In a world of carefully curated, fearful public statements, his willingness to speak his convictions without apology was a rare and often compelling thing. He spoke of faith, family, and freedom with a passion that was undeniable. But I had also recoiled at times. I had seen moments where, to my eyes, his passion had curdled into raw anger, where his arguments felt less like a defense of truth and more like a demolition of his opponents. I had questioned his methods, wondered if his confrontational style truly reflected the heart of the gentle Christ he so often invoked. I was not a devoted follower, nor was I a dedicated critic. I was simply an observer, a citizen watching the great, chaotic drama of our times unfold, and he had been one of its most prominent actors. And now I was about to see the divine review of his performance. I was about to witness him, not through the biased lens of a cable news camera, but through the perfectly clear, unsparing, and merciful eyes of heaven. I realized that my own complicated opinions, my earthly judgments of his life and legacy, were about to be rendered utterly irrelevant. I was not here to have my own views confirmed. I was here to have them corrected, to be shown a truth that transcended the noisy, temporary verdicts of the world. The towering angel who had charged me with this mission seemed to sense the completion of my understanding. He placed a hand on my shoulder. The touch was not physical, but it was incredibly real, a transmission of pure, calming strength that steadied my trembling soul. "Come," his thought resonated within me, a simple but absolute command. And as he gave the command, the beautiful, ethereal landscape of the outskirts of heaven began to dissolve around me, the light folding and shifting, transporting me to the place where all accounts are settled. The sensation of travel was instantaneous, a seamless folding of reality. The bright, ethereal landscape of heaven's outskirts dissolved and reformed around me, and I found myself standing in a vast hall of impossible scale. It was, as I instantly understood, heaven's archive, the great and solemn library of souls. My human mind struggled to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the place. It was larger than any palace, cathedral, or library on earth, but its vastness was not one of empty space, but of infinite substance. Shelves forged from what looked like solid, polished light stretched upward into a luminous mist where a ceiling should have been, and outward into a distance my eyes could not penetrate. This was a place of impossible, perfect geometry, a testament to a divine and orderly mind. And upon these endless shelves were the records of every life ever lived. They were not books of paper and ink. I saw glowing, crystalline tablets that pulsed with a soft, internal light. I saw ancient-looking scrolls that, when they unfurled slightly, revealed letters written in pure, living fire. I saw great, heavy-looking tomes that seemed to be bound in the fabric of starlight itself, their covers shimmering with the light of distant galaxies. Each one, I knew, contained the complete and unabridged story of a single human soul. Every word spoken, every deed done, every secret thought, every hidden motive, all perfectly recorded and preserved in the incorruptible light of truth. Moving silently through the endless aisles were other angelic beings, different from the warrior I had first met. These were the archivists, the solemn recorders of heaven. They moved with a quiet, focused purpose, their forms radiating a deep, ancient wisdom as they tended to the sacred records of creation. The atmosphere in this place was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was a silence so profound it was a presence in itself, a holy quiet filled with the weight and significance of countless billions of lives. The very air, if it could be called that, was composed of pure, unvarnished truth. In this hall, no lie could be conceived, no self-deception could survive, no biased opinion could hold its form. I felt my own soul become even more transparent here, as if the last vestiges of my earthly ego were being gently and painlessly stripped away, leaving only the simple, unadorned truth of who I was. The angel who guided me began to lead me forward, down a central aisle that seemed to stretch into eternity. We walked past rows upon rows of glowing life records, a silent testament to the value that heaven places on every single story, every single soul. The sheer gravity and reverence of this place was a preparation, a solemn introduction to the event I was about to witness. It was a declaration that what I was about to see was not an opinion, but an accounting based on a perfect and complete record. We finally came to a stop in a more open area, a grand, celestial rotunda where the light was even brighter. It felt like the very center of the great archive, a place of finality. My angelic guide stood beside me, a silent, powerful pillar of support. He directed my gaze forward, and there he was, Charlie Kirk. And there he was, Charlie Kirk, but it was not the man I had seen on television screens. The polished speaker, the confident political debater, the public personality, all of that was gone. It was a shell, an earthly costume that had been left behind. What stood before me was simply a soul stripped bare of all titles, accolades, and arguments. He looked younger, transparent, and in his posture, I saw a profound humility that was often hidden beneath his public armor of certainty. The original script of his life was now visible, the unedited version of the man before the world had added its own chapters. He was trembling, but as I perceived his spirit, I understood it was not a tremble of terror. It was a vibration of overwhelming awe, of profound reverence, and of a deep, soul-quaking relief. It was the posture of a weary soldier who, after a long and brutal war, has finally come home and is standing at last in the presence of his true king. He was not looking at me or at the angel or at the infinite archive around him. His entire being was focused on the figure who stood before him, and as my own gaze followed his, my spiritual knees buckled. The sight of Jesus was an experience so overwhelming it threatened to dissolve my very consciousness. His face shone with a light that was not merely bright, but was the very source of all brightness, a light that was simultaneously a consuming fire and a gentle dawn. His eyes burned not with anger, but with a fire of pure, refining truth, a gaze that saw and incinerated every falsehood, every illusion, every shadow of a lie. And yet his presence radiated a love so powerful, so personal, and so complete that it was the very definition of safety. Love and truth, two concepts that often seem at odds in our broken world, radiated from him inseparably, a single, perfect, and holy essence. In his presence, I felt the full weight of my own imperfections, the dust and grime of my earthly life. I could not lift my head. To look upon such purity while clothed in my own flawed humanity felt like an impossible act. Yet there was no condemnation, no accusation. There was only the silent, powerful reality of his holiness and the overwhelming comfort of his love. I understood in that moment that this was the great paradox of heaven, to be simultaneously aware of your complete unworthiness and your absolute, unconditional acceptance. While I was prostrate in awe, Charlie remained standing, held upright only by the grace of the one he beheld. A profound silence filled the great hall, a silence pregnant with the weight of a life about to be reviewed. And then Jesus spoke. His voice was not a vibration in the air, but a resonance in the very fabric of the soul, a sound that carried within it the infinite authority of a creator and the infinite tenderness of a father. The voice of Jesus filled the great hall, each word a perfect note of authority and tenderness that resonated in my very soul. He looked upon the trembling spirit of Charlie Kirk, and his first words were not of judgment, but of commendation. "Charlie, you were bold." The words were a simple statement of fact, yet they landed with the force of a coronation, a divine acknowledgement of the core of the man's public life. "You stood when others were silent. You spoke truth when many were deceived." As he spoke, the scene in the great archive dissolved around me, and I was no longer an observer in heaven, but a witness on earth. I was standing in the back of a crowded, hostile university auditorium. The air was thick with anger. I saw a younger Charlie Kirk on stage, facing a barrage of jeers, insults, and vitriol from students and faculty. I could feel the waves of animosity directed at him, a spiritual and emotional assault that would have caused most to crumble. I could even feel the flicker of his own human fear, but beneath it, I felt a solid, unyielding core of conviction, a refusal to be silenced. I watched as he stood his ground, not returning anger for anger, but continuing to speak what he believed to be true, a lone voice in a storm of opposition. The vision shifted. "You defended the unborn," Jesus's voice continued, and I found myself standing invisibly near the steps of the Supreme Court during a massive pro-life rally. I saw him at the podium, his voice booming not with political rhetoric, but with a passionate, heartfelt plea for the lives of those who could not speak for themselves. But then the public scene faded, and I was shown a quieter, more private moment. I saw him in a small office, speaking with a young, terrified pregnant woman, his voice gentle, offering not condemnation, but real help, resources, and a path to choosing life for her child. It was a side of the man the cameras never saw, a quiet act of compassion behind the loud public crusade. "You warned a nation. You lifted up my name unashamedly." The visions now came in a rapid, powerful montage. I saw him in the sterile, bright lights of a cable news studio, skillfully turning a hostile political debate into a discussion about faith and eternal values. I saw him in a podcast studio, speaking to millions through a microphone, urging them to return to the principles of their faith. And then, most powerfully, the public montage dissolved into the most private of scenes. I saw him alone in a sterile hotel room, hours before a major speech. The public warrior was gone. In his place was a humbled man on his knees beside the bed, his head bowed, praying. I could perceive his prayer. He wasn't asking for debating points or for a successful event. He was asking for God's will to be done, for his own pride to be diminished, and for the right words to be spoken to turn hearts back to truth. The light of these good deeds, these faithful acts, both public and private, filled the great hall of the archive. But in the perfect, unsparing truth of this place, nothing is left unexamined. The light of his commended deeds filled the great hall, a testament to a life spent in the arena, fighting for his convictions. A part of me felt a sense of relief, of vindication, but the judgment was not yet complete. In the perfect, unsparing truth of this place, nothing is left unexamined. The celebratory atmosphere subsided into one of a profound and holy seriousness. The gaze of Jesus, which had been warm with a father's pride, did not lose its love, but the fire in his eyes intensified, a flame of absolute refining truth. He looked at Charlie, and the other side of the heavenly ledger was laid bare. I watched as the visions of his life continued, but now they showed a different story. Jesus showed him the moments where the subtle, insidious poison of pride had entered his heart, the times when the calling had become entangled with his own ambition. The scene shifted, and I was an invisible witness in a green room backstage after a wildly successful event. I saw Charlie scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the screen. He was reading the adoring comments, the articles praising his rhetorical genius, the posts calling him the only hope for the nation. And I was made to feel what he felt, that intoxicating, addictive surge of human pride. I saw the subtle shift in his spirit, away from gratitude for the message God had delivered through him, and towards satisfaction in the powerful performance he had given. It was a flaw so human, so relatable, yet in the pure light of this place, it was a deviation from the path, a slight but significant misalignment of the heart. Then the vision changed again. Jesus showed him the instances where his righteous anger, a powerful tool in his arsenal, had overshadowed the compassion that he commands. I was suddenly watching a heated television debate. I saw Charlie verbally dismantle his opponent, his arguments sharp, his logic relentless. He won the debate decisively, a clear victory in the eyes of the world. But from heaven's perspective, I was shown the truth of his opponent's soul. I saw the man's own hidden wounds, the genuine but misguided fears that fueled his flawed arguments. I saw that in his zeal to win the intellectual battle, Charlie had missed a divine opportunity to be a healer, to show a sliver of grace that might have planted a seed. He had demolished a faulty argument, but he had failed to love a broken person. These moments, these instances of pride and anger, were laid bare in the archive of his life. They were not hidden, they were not excused. They were simply revealed in the pure, diagnostic light of Christ's gaze. I braced myself for a rebuke, a condemnation. But that is not what happened. Instead, I witnessed the most profound act of purification. The fire in Jesus' eyes was not a fire of destruction, but a refiner's fire. I watched as the light from his gaze enveloped the record of Charlie's imperfections. The impure motives, the selfish ambitions, the moments of anger, the dross of his life were consumed by that holy fire, burned away in an instant. And what remained was the pure, shining, and genuine gold of his faith, a faith that had been tested and, though flawed, had endured. I understood then that heaven's judgment is not like earth's. It is not a pass-fail system. It is a perfect and loving refinement, a final sanctification that separates the eternal from the temporary. As the last of the dross was burned away, leaving a soul purified and whole, a wave of profound, divine mercy filled the hall, and Jesus looked upon the refined spirit of Charlie Kirk and spoke. The fire of the divine gaze subsided, leaving behind a soul purified, a spirit made whole. The hall of the archive was filled with a silence that was not empty, but was pregnant with the grace of a final, merciful verdict. Jesus looked upon the soul of Charlie Kirk, a soul that had been commended for its strengths and cleansed of its weaknesses, and he spoke again. His voice, which had carried the fire of truth, now carried the boundless ocean of his mercy. Though imperfect, you were mine, the words flowed into the hall, a balm of absolute acceptance. Though flawed, you did not deny me before men. You gave what you had, and now I give you rest. In that moment, I understood the breathtaking economy of grace. It was not a matter of the good deeds outweighing the bad. It was a matter of a heart that, despite its stumbles and its pride, had ultimately belonged to him. That was the only thing on the scale that truly mattered. Then the Lord of all creation, the King of heaven, delivered the final verdict, the words that every soul longs to hear. The words rang with the force of thunder and the beauty of 1,000 symphonies, a declaration of both absolute authority and intimate, personal joy. Well done, faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord. At that instant, a glorious transformation occurred. The spirit of Charlie Kirk, which had been trembling in humble awe, began to radiate with an explosive, brilliant light from within. The last vestiges of his earthly weariness, The deep lines of stress etched into his soul from years of public battle simply dissolved. The imperfections and stains that had been revealed by the refiner's fire were gone, replaced by a perfect wholeness. He was then clothed in what I can only describe as garments of glory, robes that were not made of cloth, but were woven from the pure, living light of heaven itself, shining with a brilliance that was a reflection of the sun he stood before. And then he smiled. It was not the confident smirk of a debater who had just won a point. It was a true, unguarded, and utterly pure smile of a soul completely and finally at peace. It was the smile of a son who, after a long and arduous journey, had finally come home to his father's house and found not condemnation, but a joyful, welcoming celebration. The joy that radiated from him was unspeakable, a powerful, living thing that filled the great hall and brought fresh tears to my eyes. I wept not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming beauty of witnessing divine grace in its final, triumphant application. I, a mortal woman with my own long list of flaws and failings, had just witnessed the homecoming of a fellow imperfect but faithful soul, and it was the most hopeful and beautiful thing I had ever seen. The judgment was complete, the soul was at rest, but my vision didn't end there. I watched as the newly glorified spirit of Charlie Kirk was welcomed by the radiant host of heaven, his battles over, his rest begun. The profound joy and relief of that moment was a complete and perfect resolution. In any earthly story, this would have been the end. But I was not seeing an earthly story. My vision then expanded, pulling back from that intimate scene of homecoming. I saw Charlie's completed life as a single, smooth stone of pure, refined gold dropped into the center of a vast, endless ocean of time and humanity. And from the point of impact, I saw ripples, waves of spiritual consequence spreading out in every direction, continuing to travel long after the stone had settled. Jesus showed me the eternal fruit of the seeds that had been planted. The vision focused, and I was standing again in a university auditorium, but it was several years in the future. On the stage stood a passionate young pastor, his words filled with a wisdom beyond his years. Then the scene flashed back, and I saw that same young man in the audience of one of Charlie's campus events, his face twisted with anger, shouting hostile questions. I witnessed the original exchange, where Charlie, instead of reacting with anger, had answered with a persistent, patient truth that had visibly unsettled the young man. That single planted seed of truth, I was shown, had tormented him for years until it finally broke through his atheistic worldview and led him to a saving faith. The pastor on the stage was a direct harvest from a single, contentious Q&A session. The ripples continued. I was shown a quiet living room in the Midwest. A husband and wife were holding hands on their couch, watching an old video of Charlie talking about the covenant of marriage. I was made to feel the cold, bitter distance that had been between them just weeks before, the divorce papers that had been sitting on their table. His words, discovered late one night by a desperate husband, had been the catalyst for them to seek counseling and fight for their family. The peace in that home was a direct ripple from a speech given 1,000 miles away, years earlier. The waves of consequence spread even to the halls of power. I saw a local politician, alone in his office, agonizing over a difficult vote that would be politically costly but morally right. His gaze fell upon a framed quote on his desk, a quote from Charlie about having the courage to stand for truth, no matter the cost. I saw the politician take a deep, steadying breath, the ripple of another man's courage giving him the strength to cast his own faithful vote. And then I was shown the most paradoxical ripple of all, the consequence of his death. I saw two prominent media critics, men who had made a career of mocking and attacking him, now sitting together over coffee. The bravado was gone. Their conversation was quiet, sober, and for the first time, filled with a genuine searching. His sudden death at only 31 had been a mirror held up to their own mortality, forcing them to ask questions about eternity that they had long since dismissed. I saw a businessman on a plane, a man who had been a lukewarm, complacent Christian his whole life, read the news of Charlie's passing on his phone. The shock of it, the suddenness of it, was a divine alarm clock to his sleeping soul. I watched as he bowed his head right there in his first-class seat and began to repent, a fire he hadn't felt since he was a child being rekindled in his heart. It was as if his passing had become a trumpet blast, echoing louder and with more clarity than his voice ever had in life. As this incredible, sweeping vision of an eternal legacy concluded, the angel at my side spoke once more, his voice the very essence of divine perspective. This is why you are here. The world sees a tragic loss, but heaven sees a completed assignment. The earth debates a legacy, but heaven has already judged a life. He is safe, he is home. But you must warn the living, their time is short. The angel's words landed in my soul with the finality of a gavel striking in a silent courtroom. The world sees a tragic loss, but heaven sees a completed assignment. He is safe, he is home. A wave of profound peace washed over me, a final, peaceful closure to the story of the man. But the angel's next words shattered that peace with a terrible and holy urgency. But you must warn the living, their time is short. In that instant, the entire focus of my vision, my purpose, my very being, was violently pivoted. I understood with a clarity that broke my heart that this was never really about Charlie Kirk. He was just the example. He was the case study. The message was for the living. The message was for the world. The message was for me. I began to weep again, but these were not the tears of awe I had shed before. These were tears born of a crushing, terrifying weight of responsibility. I was a historian who had just been shown the final page of every history book. I was a writer who had been given the last, most important story ever to be told. The angel stood before me, his form radiating a solemn authority. He allowed my tears to flow for a moment, letting the full weight of the commission settle upon my soul. Then he spoke again, and his words were not a comfort, but a decree, a formal charge delivered from the throne room of the universe. You have witnessed a heavenly accounting. Let this truth be burned into your spirit. On earth, men build monuments of stone and bronze to honor their heroes, monuments that crumble and fade. In heaven, the only monument that endures is a life poured out in faithful service. On earth, they write histories in fading ink, stories that are revised and debated with every new generation. Here, every life is recorded in unerring light, a perfect and final record. On earth, they argue endlessly over a legacy. In heaven, we celebrate a finished race. His words about time being short echoed in my mind. He was using the shock of Charlie's sudden death at such a young age as a divine object lesson. The warning wasn't about a coming apocalypse or a specific date on a calendar. It was a far more personal and terrifying truth, the fragility of a single human breath. I saw in my mind's eye the faces of my own family, my husband, my children. I saw my neighbors, my friends from church, the familiar face of the woman at the grocery store checkout. I saw the angry faces on the cable news channels and the anonymous avatars typing vicious comments online. And I was overwhelmed by the realization that every single one of them, in their own way, was writing a story that would one day be read in this hall. Every one of them had a scroll in this great, silent library. This experience, this holy and terrible vision, wasn't a piece of celestial gossip about a famous person. It was a template. It was a public demonstration of the private judgment that every soul, known and unknown, will one day face. The angel, seeing that I had grasped the universal and personal nature of his warning, spoke again, his voice resonating with the finality of divine law. His gaze seemed to pierce through me, speaking not to me, but through me, to all those I would one day tell. The angel spoke again, and his voice was no longer just a communication to me, but a decree meant for the entire world, a divine proclamation that I was merely the chosen vessel to record. He gestured with a hand of pure light to the infinite, silent shelves of the great archive around us. Tell them, his voice resonated with the finality of a sealed record, every life is measured. Every word is recorded. Every secret motive of the heart is laid bare in the light of this place. His gaze seemed to pierce through me, looking out at the world of noise and ambition I had left behind. Tell them that their earthly measures of success are meaningless here. Fame does not matter here. The applause of millions on earth is but a silence in this hall. Wealth does not matter here. The gold in their vaults is but dust upon these scales. Power does not matter here. The titles and positions that men grant each other are erased at this threshold. They are temporary currencies for a bankrupt kingdom. A profound and terrifying simplicity settled upon me. If all of that was meaningless, then what endured? What was the currency of heaven? The angel answered my unspoken question, his voice ringing with a truth that was as beautiful as it was absolute. Only what is done in Christ. Only what is born of a true and surrendered faith. Only what is motivated by a pure and selfless love will last. That is the gold that survives the refiner's fire. Everything else is wood, hay, and stubble, consumed in an instant by the holiness of this reality. The sheer weight of this truth, the responsibility of the message I was being given, crushed me. A sob escaped my soul. Why me? I cried out in a thought of pure, desperate anguish. Why are you showing this to me? I am not a pastor, not a prophet. I am a quiet observer, a woman of books and histories, who will listen to my voice. The angel's answer was not a comfort, but a heartbreaking diagnosis of the very world I came from. His presence radiated a deep, divine sorrow. Because people are distracted, he stated, the truth of it piercing my heart. You are being sent because the world you have left is drunk on the wine of the temporary. He showed me a brief, flashing vision of people all over the world, their faces illuminated by screens, their expressions contorted with anxiety and rage over the latest political outrage or social media drama. They argue with passion about their earthly leaders, but they have forgotten their eternal king. They debate the policies of temporary kingdoms, but they neglect the reality of an everlasting one. It is the great deception, the enemy's most effective strategy, to get my Father's children to invest all their passion, all their energy, and all their worship into a world that is passing away like a vapor, while ignoring the unshakable reality of the world to come. His gaze met mine, and the final core of my commission was delivered, a clear and non-negotiable mandate. You will go back and you will tell them. Tell them that judgment is real, heaven is real, hell is real. And that Jesus Christ, the one who was just judged with both perfect truth and perfect mercy, is the only way, the only truth, and the only life. The final, unshakable command of the angel settled upon me. The purpose of my journey was now terrifyingly clear. My role as a witness was sealed. Before the pull of the world began to reclaim me, I was granted one final glimpse. The scene of the great archive dissolved, and I saw Charlie Kirk one last time. He was not standing before a throne of judgment. He was walking through the radiant fields of heaven, surrounded by other beings of brilliant light. He was no longer weary from his earthly battles, no longer misunderstood by his critics or idealized by his followers, no longer attacked or defending. He was simply free. A joy radiated from him that was so pure, so complete, it was a living thing. He was laughing, a sound of deep, unrestrained happiness, the sound of a son who is finally and completely home. I saw him smile, a smile of such purity and peace that I had never seen on any human face. And as a final, beautiful benediction, I heard the voice of Jesus echo through that holy place once more, a final seal upon a completed life. Well done, enter your rest. That peaceful, triumphant image was the last thing I saw in heaven, because in the next instant, I felt a sudden, violent pull. My spirit, which had been weightless and free, was suddenly seized by an irresistible force. I was not guided back through the gentle, pearlescent tunnel through which I had arrived. This was different. My spirit rushed downward, as if the physical gravity of the mortal world had reached across dimensions and was dragging me back with a brutal, unbreakable grip. The light of heaven was not a fading sunset. It was a lamp that was instantly switched off, plunging me into a roaring, chaotic darkness. The feeling of being compressed, of my infinite spiritual form being forced back into the painfully finite container of my body, was an agony beyond description. With a bone-jarring impact that was more spiritual than physical, I slammed back into my mortal flesh. The first sensation was weight. A crushing, suffocating heaviness that I had not felt in what seemed like a lifetime. The second was the return of my body's limitations, the dull ache of my muscles, the slow, clumsy beat of a physical heart the desperate, burning need for air in lungs that had forgotten how to function. The silent, holy peace of heaven was shattered by the frantic, thumping drumbeat of my own blood in my ears. With a ragged, convulsive gasp, my eyes flew open. I was not in an infinite hall of light. I was staring up at the familiar, textured plaster of my own bedroom ceiling. The air was thick and heavy, and I was choking on it, my chest heaving. My gaze darted to the side. The red, digital numbers on my bedside clock glowed with an accusatory reality. It read 3:14 a.m., September 12, 2025. A torrent of hot, real human tears began to stream down my face, soaking my pillow. My body shook with a storm of sobs, a physical release for a soul that had just traveled to the edge of eternity and back. I was back, and I realized with a certainty that shook my very bones that I had been given an urgent and terrible message from heaven. For the past week, I have lived in two worlds at once. I have walked through my days here in the solid, predictable world of time and consequence, but my soul has remained in that great, silent archive, forever marked by the weight of what I saw. I have tried to articulate the experience, but human language feels like a clumsy, inadequate tool to describe the reality of eternity. So now I speak to you, not as a woman telling a fanciful story, but as a witness delivering a sworn testimony, a messenger burdened with a truth that I have been commanded to declare. What you have heard is not my opinion, not my interpretation. It is the report I was given, a glimpse into a divine accounting that awaits every soul. Here is the truth of the matter. Charlie Kirk died on September 10th, 2025, but for him, death was not the end, it was a transition. He stood before the throne of Jesus Christ. His life was unrolled like a scroll, and his works were weighed upon a perfect scale. His imperfections, his pride, and his anger were not ignored, but were exposed and consumed by a holy, refining fire. And his faith, though flawed and human, was found to be genuine. It was the gold that remained after the dross was burned away, and it was rewarded. He is safe, he is home, but the most urgent decree I received that night was that this message is not ultimately about him. It is about you, it is about all of us who are still drawing breath. Life, as I now understand it, is but a vapor, a brief and fragile mist that appears for a moment and then vanishes. We are all just one heartbeat, one car accident, one sudden aneurysm away from standing in that same great hall. And in that moment, what will matter? I saw it with my own eyes. Our passionate political arguments will fall silent. Our clever social media posts will evaporate into meaninglessness. Our bank accounts and our careers, the things we invest so much of our lives in, will hold no currency there. The only thing that will endure, the only thing that will have any weight on those celestial scales, is whether we belong to Christ. What will matter is whether we lived in his love, whether we were faithful with the precious, fleeting breath he gave to us. This is my testimony, and this is my urgent message, delivered to you from a woman who has seen the finality of eternity. Please, I implore you, take it seriously. Look past the temporary debates that consume your energy and your passion. Turn back to God with all your hearts, live ready. For just as Charlie Kirk's time on earth ended suddenly in the prime of his life, so could ours.